Hello, my name's Hermione McDonald-Thompson and I teach textiles at work in College. The course we offer is a 2-year course, and along the way you will be taught a whole range of skills that include stitched, manipulated and printed textiles. Whether that's a fine art bias or fashion textiles interest, will ensure that your needs are met through being able to express your creativity in various ways. The course itself is really exciting, and we make sure that we collect lots of visual information from your local environment, of course, but also visiting galleries and going to different places such as Brighton and London, and then a little further afield. In the past, we've been on wonderful trips abroad to Italy, where we visited Rome and Venice. We've also been to New York and Barcelona and Paris. Many artists come in from a whole range of disciplines. That's including ceramicists, willow makers. We also have life drawing, and the idea is that lots and lots of research informs your own work. So that can start today. I'm going to be showing you how to express yourselves using paint, colour and pattern, using collage and painting techniques. So I do hope you can join me and see what we can do.
Collecting visual information from gardens or walks, whether that's photographs or actual flora and fauna, will form the starting point for our colour collages. And actually, it's a wonderful place to start for many textile designers.
So the paints that I'm using today are acrylic paints. They're plastic based paints, but any paint will do. Try to start with some white. The first collage colours we're going to focus on are going to be green, but I am going to put all the primaries on my plate, and I'm just using a paper plate. You could use a piece of paper. Oh, this is a really old paint. It should be fine. So might need a little bit of help coming out. Not going to need too much blue, luckily. I've got another blue here, so I might just pop a bit of that down as well. There we go. Okay. One of the secrets to painting when you're mixing colours is to make sure your water is always clean. So I've got a nice big jar here, so I don't have to keep filling up all the time. So I'm going to start with my lighter green. So if you look here, you can see there's a whole range of different tones, from the lovely, beautiful light lime colour all the way up to this variegated plant, which is giving us a beautiful, rich green. And again with this fern, which is your typical garden green plant. So starting with a little bit of white, I'm going to then start by mixing in my yellow. That's quite thick, but what we're going to aim for is a nice consistency similar to that of cream. And a tiny bit of blue. You'll be surprised how far a tiny bit of blue can go. So it looks quite yellow on screen, but it's actually starting to turn into a lime. So what I'm going to do is build up a page of paint. which will give me my collage materials that I can then cut up. I've got quite a nice wide flat brush here, but do you know what? Any brush will do. And because I'm now going to just start my colours a little bit darker, I can build up into that paint if I want to. But once we start dark, it's much trickier to get lighter. So tonally, it's just a little bit darker, but having that soft variety in tone when it comes to the collages will be quite interesting. And you can see this little yellow flower might be quite fun to use as well as inspiration. So I'm now looking back here. Constantly my eye is darting between the colour and the leaves, the inspiration that I'm looking at. Might add a tiny bit of white just to soften that back a bit. The paper that I'm using actually is a cartridge paper, so I've just ripped that out of a sketchbook. I think I might have made a bit of a jump there, but if I just add a bit of white, I can pale it back. I mean, there's no wrong or right way of doing this. We're just playing with colour. So don't be frightened if it's not entirely accurate. What we're doing is we're using the flora and fauna as inspiration, just to get those creative juices flowing. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to speed this up for you, and you'll see that this will turn into a range of different tones just by gently going back and forth, mixing a little bit of white in, a bit more yellow and a bit of green. If you do have other green paints, you could use a tiny bit, but I really would strongly recommend that you create your own. You can see I've added a tiny bit of red there just to create a little bit of warmth. It's just a slightly different green with that additional warmth overtone.
Here I am wanting to just show you the development of building up lots of different colour using acrylic paint, softening back by adding white, creating some nice khaki colours so that I have a big variety of greens ready to collage with later on when it's dry. If you do have some ready mixed green, please feel free to use that as a base, and adding some yellow can make it into a line again with the white, or equally if you wanted to add a dash of red, that can give you a lovely warmth to your green. And again, if you add a bit of blue, it cools that right back. So just experiment and play. You've got lots of inspiration, whether that's actual foliage in front of you. Even weeds can be brilliant actually. Making sure you keep your brush nice and wet, because acrylic can harden quite quickly. And if you did need to stop for some time, if you just flick some water onto your paints actually, or put a piece of cling film over the top, you'll keep them nice and moist for further painting. Finding a new sheet of paper, you can then start to build up your pink palette, repeating the same way to mix paints, starting with white, adding the red and maybe a bit of yellow to make a little orange, or a little bit of blue to bring out the cooler purple shades. There you have it. You should have two palettes that again you could go back to if you ran out of a particular colour, or build up further greys can be really interesting, and some neutrals. So thinking about the actual woodland or painted fences, you can create a range of knockback hues, some muted sages, and these can offer a really lovely contrast when placed next to the brighter greens and pinks later on for your collage. It's all very much about experimenting and playing. Just really enjoy mixing paint and seeing where it takes you. When your papers are dry and you've cut them out, you can arrange them into colour palettes and start referencing the original starting point, thinking about the beautiful textures and colours. Using pastels and pencils to create some textures by mark making on top of the papers can add another dimension to our collage. This by no means is essential. It's something that I really like to do by layering up my colours. So you can see from here I'm looking at the different patterns that the rose and the leaf offer. So even though just some stripes, I can really start to think about how those colours could work together. The marks from the thistle were really quite spiky. By layering them together, allowed me to create this stripy pattern. So although it didn't necessarily look like its original source, you can really improvise and by creating some mark making onto your coloured squares. So to get started for our actual collage building, the final stage, you'll need a pair of scissors naturally, or you could use a craft knife and a glue stick. I've cut out 4 squares of cartridge paper, 15 centimetres by 15 centimetres, but again you can decide what your little collection of collages will look like in terms of their size. I looked at the artist Julie Hamilton and the famous Frenchman Henri Matisse to give me some inspiration. I'll add those links at the end of the tutorial. So you really at this stage are starting to play with colour, whatever you're drawn to, and referencing very loosely your original starting point. As you can see, I have looked at the fern, and the small roses have given me those tiny little pockets of pink, the 3 dots, but actually everything else becomes very simplified in ovals and curves and moon shapes, squares and rectangles. So once again I'm starting to explore composition, but in a far more loose way. Continuing to lay a pattern and arrange the different shapes to create individual compositions. I haven't actually stuck anything down at this point because I might leave it for half an hour and come back and just see what I think looks nice. And actually taking photographs of each layout before you make that commitment to stick down can be a good way of working as well, just enough to adjust your eye. Keeping all the negative pieces can also be a really interesting way of working. So you can see the circles I can cut out and leave rings. So just consider that when you're cutting into your papers. The piece you leave behind can actually offer really, really interesting results. When it comes to gluing down, a Pritt stick will suffice. And if you've spent time carefully arranging your collage into the composition that you desire, it would be worthwhile taking a quick snapshot as a reference so that you can look back and check everything's in the same place. When we're working at college, sometimes these types of mini designs can develop into flat screen prints, which can offer a very exciting repetitive printing process onto fabrics. And then of course you can change your colours and develop that into a fine art piece or equally a fashion garment. Sometimes these might develop into embroidery, so if you enjoy the tactile surface, embellishing with stitch. There's a multitude of ways that you can interpret these beautiful collages that you have created, because ideally you're now developing your language of pattern, shape, colour and texture. to inform the textile design process. So just finishing your collages off, I imagine you will have a big bag of leftovers like I do. So these would make beautiful developments from the full collages that we've been focusing on, because of course I'm sure you, as I am playing with different shapes, moving them around, you come up with more ideas as your work makes progress. Thinking about your colour, your pattern, your shape and your texture, and how this arrangement, this juxtaposition of shape and colour can inform your own work is somewhere that we like to go when we're beginning a textile project. At the end of the tutorial, there is a beautiful example of a sketchbook, and at the beginning you'll see how the interplay of colour and pattern is used with collage, but also with fabric and textures. So this skill can inform many parts of the textile design process. The main thing is for you to now enjoy playing with your colour palette and thinking about having many colours in one of your collages, or reducing that colour palette to a few colours. It really is up to you, and to trust your instincts with how you develop these into individual compositions. So I hope you've enjoyed yourself and been able to explore and create and engage in this fantastic process that will hopefully inform your work at a much later date. Happy collaging. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed your journey making your colour collages. Our links and email addresses will be on the next few slides, so please take a look and do get in touch if you have any questions at all.